Malek, who is assistant professor in land use and ecosystem dynamics at the Institute for Environmental Studies at VU Amsterdam. It's shortened IBM. And his research focused on the future impact of climate extremes. And he focused in his in the research that we talk about today on smallholder farmers who adopt fair trade farming techniques. And we'll also have Claudia Paitan, who works at Olam, the commodity crop trader, where she holds the position of a Sustainability and Productivity Analyst. She will also tell us a bit more about her work later on. But first, Žiga, please, if you could start your presentation. We'll have some time for questions afterwards, then Claudia will follow, and then we have some time for discussion as well. In the meantime, you can post your questions in the chat. So Žiga, there you go.
I hope you can all see my slides. So thank you for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, you have all seen now that I can cook coffee, but let's also see how I'm involved in coffee otherwise. So we did this study on fair trade and climate change that I'll present in the following slides. And this was a joint effort of the IBM, so our institute, but also the School for Applied Sciences, Bern in Switzerland, and Fairtrade International from Bonn, Germany. So many of us start our days, with, Many of us start our days with a cup of coffee or tea. We eat bananas during the day, and sometimes chocolate is the only remaining friend we have, right? But these food items are much more important than that. So they provide livelihoods to tens of millions of people all around the world. So bananas, for example, are the most produced fruit in the world, so the most traded fruit. Tea is the second most popular beverage after water, and coffee and cocoa are also among the most traded tropical agricultural commodities. And all these, they bring so much pleasure, in our daily life to many people. But your daily coffee, tea, or chocolate could actually be much more bitter or darker than you would want them to be. So we are already aware that these crops have a negative side as well. So often the producers of these crops are not paid a salary that enables them a life worth living. So they work in poor conditions. And for cocoa and coffee, there are also often problems when it comes to child slavery. So I think we all agree that we want that the producers of these commodities are fairly paid, they live good lives, and that their kids, grow up happily as well. Which brings me to voluntary sustainability standards, particularly fair trade. So you have all probably heard of fair trade. It's one of the most mainstream voluntary sustainability standards. These are supply chains which strives towards fair payments to their producers. They also want to maintain long-term relationships with their producers, and they also, strive towards more sustainable production. And they do this by offering the producers a premium, which we can often also see in the stores by yourselves. Often these items are a bit more expensive. So in our research, we focus on the 4 crops that you see on the slide. And in total, there's 1.7 million producers of banana, cocoa, coffee, and tea producing fair trade crops. And they're spread across 1,400 producers organizations. So these are locations where different producers work at. And so you see that there's a lot of people, 1.7 million producers, and you consider also their families and so on. So fair trade, but also other supply chains, they want to continue their production. They also want to maintain long-term relationships with their producers. And this will, however, be difficult due to climate change. So our planet is getting drier, it's getting hotter. And together with more frequent extreme rainfall as well at the same time, it has already impacted production of many crops, but particularly also these. So note that these producers are smallholders. Banana are workers on plantations, but for coffee, cocoa, and tea, these are smallholders. And they cannot adapt to climate change by themselves often. This is expensive, for example. So Fairtrade wants to provide them with proper training and funds to implement appropriate adaptation measures. So in addition, all these crops, as you can see, they grow in the tropics, which is, it's hotter, but it's also humider. So we don't associate them with drought, for example. But this means that these crops have a narrow temperature and humidity range. So this means they're not used to many of the extremes. So they're not used to drought. They're not used to very extreme temperatures. And I'll just briefly go through these extremes. So if we look at crop of drought, so drought is a major limiting factor in all the crops that I mentioned. It leads to lower yields. It can damage young plants, and it can lower crop quality and taste. So we have seen this in tea. So there was still the same yield, but the taste was different. And there is potential adaptation to it. New, more drought-tolerant varieties, which is difficult. We have to completely change. Also irrigation, and in some context, also agroforestry. So you have shaded crops. Well, this is not possible, for example, for banana, mostly. And on the image, you can see an example from the Brazilian state of Espírito Santo. This is a coffee plantation. It's not a Fairtrade one, but it is a coffee plantation. In normal years, the above image, and the drought from last year. What happened to this plantation? It's basically gone. Then heat stress is the second extreme we looked at. It can lead to higher water demands. So even if there's no drought, but there's higher temperatures, it could mean that there's not sufficient water suddenly. It can lead to lower and less predictable yields and more pests and diseases. Also, it can lead to a complete harvest loss, not only this year, but also in the subsequent years. And potential adaptation also here is agroforestry, irrigation, and new varieties. And on the image, you can see an example what it does to cocoa. So basically the plants start dying. Another impact we looked at is extreme rainfall. So it can lead to increased soil erosion. So cocoa, coffee are often produced, also tea, on slopes. And you can see an image from Peru, actually, the bottom one, increased erosion after an extreme rainfall event. It can also lead to root decomposition and oxygen deficiency. And the above image shows this well. This is a banana plantation from the Philippines after a typhoon. But the banana survived the typhoon damage, but there was the water stayed on the ground for quite many days. And it basically led to the roots rotted. It also leads to more pests and diseases. So even if they do survive that, then there's more pests. And there's also, when it comes to this extreme, also more non-crop related impacts, such as landslides, but also human casualties, interruptions to road infrastructure, or damage to crops that were already harvested. So potential adaptation here is improved drainage, better road and storage infrastructure, and agroforestry. And you can imagine, I mentioned now a lot of things that are difficult to identify, but are also difficult to adapt to, and that's why it's really important to be prepared. And this is where we scientists enter the game. We basically process data from general circulation models. These are global climate change projections of future climate change. And we looked at 3 particular agroclimatic indicators. So consecutive dry days for drought. This means days that are consecutive without any rainfall. Warm spell duration, which is again, how long are periods with extremely high temperatures. And heavy precipitation days. This is any day with more than 10 millimeters of rainfall, which is quite a lot. We looked at 2 scenarios. So medium emission scenario, 4.5, RCP 4.5, sort of what we're doing right now, but with some mitigation. And we have looked at the high emission scenario. So just to see what happens if we don't do anything as a global community, we continue driving cars at the same extent, burning coal, and eating beef and so on. And we compared the 2050 situation with the current climate. So Fairtrade was interested in the near future, so because this makes it possible for them to adapt. So let's just go to drought. So at the first glance, it doesn't look that bad. Huh? So there's not many dark red points. So this means these are areas that will not have so many dry droughts in the future. But there are some areas that will experience still quite a lot of them. These are areas, particularly South Brazil, like I showed the image before, but these are areas that are not where crops are not used to any drought at all. So that's why this is so problematic. And if we look at the more extreme scenario, we see obviously more of this. But still, it doesn't look that bad. If we look, for example, at banana, not impacted by drought, cocoa as well. But then if we look at coffee, we can see that in Caribbean and Central America, but also South America, we might experience problems. So these are just total, this is a share of farmers. So how many people will be impacted by that? but often these are people in the area where Fairtrade sources most crops from. So let's say Central America and Brazil. And when we look at tea, then we see it's also quite a big problem. So we see that in areas like Southeast Asia, where there was basically very few droughts, we will see many more in the future. Which brings me to the next point, and this is the big issue, so heat stress. So we didn't identify that these areas will experience so many droughts, but on the other side will experience considerably more and considerably longer events with heat stresses. So again, these are crops that grow in a narrow temperature range. They are used to warm environments, but extremely long periods with extremely high temperatures are problematic. Will also mean that they need much more water. So even if in the case that there's the same amount of rainfall or even more, it might not be sufficient. And here we can see already many more areas. We can see all the circles with red. These are areas with considerably more heat stress, so events with longer and extreme temperatures. And often these are areas that I have already shown before that will experience some drought or maybe a lot of drought. So even some drought might be problematic if it intersects with longer periods of heat stress. I didn't show any red points as circles in the extreme scenario, as you see here on the right side, because you can see it's just catastrophic. It's everywhere red. But I'm an optimist, so let's hope that the left one will happen. But even here, we see that there are areas which we need to specifically target, such as for banana, we look at Ecuador, cocoa. Fortunately, and Claudia knows this more, most of cocoa is produced in West Africa, but outside of it, it might become difficult. And for coffee, we see a lot of traditional areas like Central America, Brazil, but also for fair trade, India is important. It might become problematic there. And then for tea, we see that areas, particularly South Africa or Southeastern Africa, will be problematic, and South Asia. Sorry, my slides are not. Okay, so again, a summary here shows that, for some crops, it might not be so problematic. But then if we look at cocoa, we see that basically outside of West Africa, all areas might become, it might become more difficult to grow cocoa. So this might not be a problem now because most cocoa is grown in West Africa. But, if we want to diversify or expand cocoa production, this might be an issue. But for coffee and tea, we see that we experience a lot of areas where we'll have more and longer periods with extremely high temperatures. So, for example, Central and East Africa, which is the birthplace of coffee, will experience a lot of problems there, a lot of heat stress. But also in the most important region for fair trade, this is the Caribbean and Central America region. And when it comes to tea, also here we see that virtually all tea producers will experience heat stress. And while this might not impact yield, it might lead to just different taste, which is also problematic. And then let's look at extreme rainfall, which again, this is not total rainfall in the year, which contributes generally beneficially to the crops. This is a sudden and very high amount of rainfall. And also here we see that we have some focus areas, even some that I have shown you images from before, like cocoa and coffee production areas in Peru and Ecuador and so on. And for tea and coffee, also in Eastern Africa. So this summary shows that in cocoa, particularly, we will see, again, outside of West Africa, a lot of these extreme events. For coffee, in a lot of areas, in Central and East Africa, South America, and South Asia, we'll see a lot of producers experiencing more extreme rainfall events, and the same for tea. So tea is already used of extreme rainfall, right? It grows in monsoon areas, but even more of these rainfall events or a changed pattern, it might considerably impact tea production. So what I want to emphasize here is, I have shown you a lot of maps, but actually we have to go beyond areas. We have to think that these are people working there. So this circle, for example, here are 100,000 tea producers in Malawi and Tanzania. This one here are more than 100,000 coffee, cocoa and banana producers in Peru and Ecuador that will be impacted, and Colombia as well. This area is the Central American coffee producers mostly. Here we have over 300,000 of them as well. And also here in Eastern Africa, over 300,000 producers. So these are large numbers we're talking about. These are, if we consider their families, this means millions of people will be impacted by this. So we observed that there's a lot of regional disparities. So we cannot just say it will get worse everywhere or it will get better somewhere. This means that adaptation needs to be targeted to specific areas. But it's also very important now to take our results and look at the local context. So the type of soil is very important. How good is the drainage of the soil? The terrain is important, so how steep it is. What's the erodibility of slopes and so on. So this is important to identify actual impact. So this could mean that in some areas where we identified very few changes to the climate, even minor changes might lead to catastrophic consequences because just the soil are poorly drained. And there will be so much water, there will be root rot for banana, for example, right? So that's why it's very important to look at the local context. And in addition, it's also very important to look at local practices. So agroforestry, varieties used, but also access to infrastructure and refrigeration infrastructure. So even minor, impacts or minor extreme events could cause a lot of damage to these people because a lot of them are very poor and they don't have the means to, just say, yeah, this year we'll have a minor decrease in yields, but we'll manage somehow. No, they will not. Some of them will not be able to manage. So if you want to know more, we just published a paper a few weeks ago on this. So I invite you to look at it or just download, contact me and I can send it to you as well. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. And yeah, thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Žiga. Very interesting, the results of your research. So we have some time for questions. Please, you can put them in the chat or just signal that you want to ask something. So yeah, very nice, very nice, but interesting to see that, yeah, a global approach or the same approach doesn't work for all of the farmers. So I wondered, how would it then actually work if you say that smallholder farmers are very dependent on their yield, so they can't really experiment much? How does it then work to make sure that the results of your research gets to the farmers, and how can they be enabled to implement them as well, or what can sort of has to happen? Or you also mentioned Fairtrade as a network of the platform that wants to actually help these farmers. So how would that then work to link it to practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one of the things why we were also excited about this project, because we actually worked with an important societal partner who was interested. They want to, at the end, we shared the maps with them and they said, we want to know which areas we need to focus on, which are more urgent areas, and we also have limited money, and they know in which areas the farmers are maybe lacking behind in terms of implementing some adaptation measures. They know in which areas they need to implement more training. So, and this helped them a lot. So the study was actually divided in two parts. There was another part where we actually did 2 case studies this was Ghana and in South India. And this was done by the Swiss partners, but due to COVID, we couldn't really go on the field. But that's why we hope to continue our collaboration and to actually look at the impacts, because what do actually changes to the yields would be. But on the other side, Fairtrade shared this with their producing organizations, let's say with the producing organization in Central America, and they know very well what does it mean if they have 10 additional days of extreme temperature. So they know this much better. Again, for us, it was difficult to say 10 days of heat waves, additional days, means this decline in yield. No, it's different in Eastern Africa, it's different in Vietnam, it's different in Guatemala, for example. But they know, they know for the Central American context what this means. They know what this means for the Vietnamese context and so on. So that's why we were so happy about this, and I hope that it will really, reach the people that this information will really reach the people who need it most.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a very clear focus and also on the ground, and you work with local partners. And is there other stakeholders that you approach with, or that you forward these results to, like on the policy level, or other sort of?
Yeah, so there was quite some interest from, but already last year, we finished the study last year from, let's say, coffee networks or other supply chains. I think this is like the first cross supply chain analysis. And also a lot of previous studies looked at changes to average climate variables. So how will the average temperature change? How will the average precipitation change, total precipitation? In the tropics, there's not always such large changes. For Brazil, for example, there's maybe half a Celsius degree warming and even the same amount of rainfall, but we have shown that this would mean still longer droughts, extremely high temperatures, and then some extreme rainfall in the autumn, you know, the worst possible situation for farmers. And this just means they need to adapt a lot. But there was also a lot of interest from other scientists, which I was happy to see. And I want to emphasize that I hope we're all on the path for the 4.5 scenario. So of course they will still have coffee. It will not be, you know, complete failure. But that's why I want to emphasize that behind each point there's people, because even if, you know, 10,000 people suddenly cannot produce anymore, and it's very difficult in these areas to suddenly switch to a different crop and to, you know, just change how you will fulfill your livelihood. It's often not possible. Yeah, that was actually my other question, if there's any alternatives if for the farmers as a, well, maybe very negative scenario, but yeah, so research suggests diversification is one key. So just instead of focusing, you know, on coffee, that you have more eggs in the basket. And but this is again difficult. So that's why this is where Fairtrade comes into. You know, they help them with diversifying the crops they produce in case of failure. Because it's not possible to, these are all tree crops. You cannot say this year I have a failure in coffee, I'll just have cocoa next year, or banana. These are all long-term investments usually, right? Especially if we talk about that they have to start implementing irrigation or agroforestry. This is just everything that's done today, they will yield the benefits in 5 to 10 years. And there will be a lot of money needs to be invested in that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. Also, this long-term perspective, or this, yeah, the time in between the investment now and the benefit later. Very nice. Is there any more questions? Otherwise, I suggest that we move on to Claudia and her input here. I see none for now. We also have some more time later on. So, Claudia, please.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the invitation. First of all, I will try to deliver to the expectations, because I think right now here I am as a researcher from the VU, but also as a Sustainability and Productivity Analyst at Olam. And I've been requested to ask like in between from both of them, right? Because I'm capitalizing a lot on the research learning in my everyday work. So Olam, just as a general introduction for all of you, it's one of the largest agri-commodity traders in the world. In cocoa, we are the largest ones, and so we are managing a lot of indirectly managing, right? Like smallholder systems. And I work for the cocoa business units. So Olam, it's a big company, but it's divided into different units, and I'm working for the one that is having businesses focus on smallholder farmers. So cocoa, coffee, tea, cashew nuts that are not usually large-scale plantations like you have, for instance, for cotton or for maize, etc. So the kind of business is completely different. So let me share my screen. I have prepared a presentation based on the research that I have done, but I would introduce it to you like from the perspective of what I do also. Funny enough, I was this works. Now this works. Okay, perfect. So the research that I conducted at the VU was focused on how to solve sustainability issues in the global cocoa supply chain. It was always focused from the corporate perspective, and I analyzed a lot of questions, but I will focus one of them was very importantly, and to try to analyze what can be the best strategy at the landscape scale and at the farm level scale to address the sustainability issues, because there is often in the industry and in the sector the whole discussion about should we go for higher yields in the farm, and this way we will reduce the area of production, so we will be having more areas to conserve forests or restore forests, or shall we go for the other alternative of trying to have more sustainable farming systems in the farm itself, you know, with higher shade trees, more diversified food crops, so you also achieve food security. What is best, right? And research has come from different angles, a lot of it doing analysis on the impacts on the farm itself, and some other research looking at the landscape level, right, taking into account the protected area distribution and everything. And here we wanted to model, to try to model different scenarios of what could be the final outcome in sustainability terms if you implement one strategy versus the other. And we had quite interesting findings. And before I go into the boring graphs, scientific graphs, I give you the overview. At the farm level, cocoa agroforestry systems, which are being said to be the most sustainable, right? Because you have more shade trees, you have better practices that allows you to have a better soil health, etc. It's seen as more sustainable, right? You can capture more carbon, you can capture more biodiversity, but also very often literature has shown that the yields are lower, meaning that can compromise many things, right? You probably need larger areas to produce the same amount of cocoa that if you have highly intensive systems, and that it might be that because of the lower yields, farmers don't get enough livelihoods, right? And then the poverty gets into the way. Well, on the other hand, if you have full sun systems that are highly productive, right, you can reach even 3 tons per hectare. Well, currently in West Africa, we are starting with 300 kilograms per hectare. This varies a lot, of course, but of course this is not enough, especially knowing that cocoa it's a smallholder system where you have an average 2 hectares, max 3 hectares in most of the most important producing countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana in West Africa. So at the farm level, cocoa agroforestry, because of the lower yields, it behaves worse environmentally than cocoa full sun because of the lower yields, right? You need more area to produce the same, so the carbon losses and biodiversity losses can be higher. The only impacts that are less bad are those for toxicity, right? Because you're using less fertilizer, less pesticides, less fungicides, less herbicides, etc. That you usually have in more intensive full sun systems. So that is what is showing in this graph. And the arrows are showing the effects of agroforestry, the pink, that are higher than, so more negative than cocoa full sun. So as I say, at the farm level, agroforestry has larger impact than cocoa full suns. But what happens when you do this at a larger scale? And to do that, we did a modeling exercise. We set up 3 different scenarios and we applied this to Ghana, the second largest cocoa producer and exporter in the world. And this is a landscape, and we set 3 different scenarios, modeling different choices at the landscape level. So this is the main cocoa producing area, and what we did is we say, okay, what if you do a green development scenario where you go all in for agroforestry and you try to protect the forest, you do very good law enforcement to protect the forest and restore them. Another one called agribusiness paradise, where we go all full sun for highly intensive systems, and another one, intermediate one. And the results were very clear. Like I say, at the farm level, you have like the agroforestry systems behaving worse in summary than cocoa full sun systems. But when you go at the landscape level and you compare the boosting agroforestry system at the landscape level can deliver higher biodiversity and carbon gains, right? So carbon fixation. So which basically it's telling us that everything depends on how are you doing it. So the impacts in the end are strongly modulated by the socioeconomic context and what kind of decisions you're doing, right? Like, so if there are no law enforcement measures to protect the forest, then either way, probably if you are boosting agroforestry, you will need larger areas that can compromise these areas. While cocoa full sun, regardless of the high efficiency at the farmer level, if you lack this kind of protection measure, can also deliver bad outcomes. So, but if you look at this graph at the right side, we compare the farm level impacts and the landscape level, and if it has negative values, means that it's fixating or there is less biodiversity loss, right? So, like this is showing the results for the 3 scenarios, and it's basically telling what I just told you. Very importantly, to highlight, I did this analysis thinking about how companies are managing their supply chains, is that the impacts are not linear. We are used to this kind of very simplistic kind of thinking. You do more of this, then you get more of this. But as I say, there are a lot of modulating factors that determine the impacts in the end. And it is very important to capture the impacts of either decision, putting it into the spatial context and in the socioeconomic context, which is something that is very difficult to do because the current practice in the in the private sector is that we do life cycle assessments, right? That basically they are using very broad average impact factors to calculate biodiversity emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and it does not tell you exactly, it's not reflecting the spatial variability that exists in reality. Yeah. And very importantly, because the land resources are limited, there is always competition between the sector that you're interested on, in this case cocoa, and other activities, economic activities that are having also intense use on the land. So it's very important to take into account this and think about your supply chain beyond just your own activity, because whatever decision you take, it starts an interaction with all the other sectors that are competing for the limited resource of land. And that was one of the main conclusions of the papers, that we need to collaborate first across the sector, inside the sector with the competitors and also the different institutions, and across different sectors. And then I did another research focus trying to analyze what are the commitments that companies are doing to address these problems. And there is a lot, especially in the last decade, there has been an increase, a high increase in sustainability commitments, voluntary ones, to address this. How do we know if these are working? Well, the first thing that we need to know is to understand what is the distribution of these commitments, who is adopting these commitments, and what are they committing to? Is the whole supply chain at the global scale being covered? Is it enough, or there are certain gaps in terms of the coverage itself or in terms of the topics? So this research was very interesting, well, for me, because we analyzed traders, and like I told you, Olam is a trader, is the largest cocoa trader in the world, and traders are usually not very much in the spotlight of research and in the news. It's increasing, but very, very slowly, because we are much further from the consumer end than other companies like the chocolate makers, for instance. If I tell you Nestle, immediately comes to your mind. But if I tell you Olam, you probably don't know anything about it, but we are supplying to these big companies. And in the end, what they can do in terms of sustainability pretty much depends about what can we do. We had to deliver and implement on the ground. So this research, that's why it was focused on that. And we found that the commitments are usually very much concentrated between the largest companies, because they have a larger representation in the market. And if you do one commitment well and then you apply to your whole supply chain, then of course it has a larger impact than if a small company is doing it, at least in terms of volume and coverage. And there are different strategies. So Žiga was talking about Fairtrade certification, and there are other certifications also out there, and usually smaller companies tend to adopt more these hands-off strategies of getting a third-party certification, because the schemes are already created. You just have to, of course, certify yourself, which is not easy, but you're relying on an external body. While the current trend for the biggest companies is that actually they are creating their own standards and certifying, not in the same way than the official certifying bodies like Fairtrade or Rainforest Alliance, but they are also selling the cocoa at higher prices based on the sustainability programs that they have. Now, it is not the same, but this is because of the volumes. It is dominating the market. So I compiled data, a lot of data of cocoa traders, and I identified first of all what are the different trading profiles based on the sourcing practices that they are having, and then I documented all the sustainability commitments and check where are the gaps and where the imbalances lay. So there are identify 6 different types of traders. You have the large transnational firms. Olam is one of them, having a huge and extended network of sourcing and selling points. You have medium international firms that have similar, but they usually source from a very limited number of countries, have a much smaller network, but still are high in terms of volume. Then you have the small transnational firms, similar but lower, and then the large and small domestic firms that are usually based in countries that are producing important volumes, but are not as big players as, for instance, Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, or Ghana. And then you have, importantly, farmer cooperatives, because there are some farmer cooperatives indeed exporting themselves to the world, but of course the scale of this is much smaller. So if you look at how the distribution of these traders is around the world, which is this, I don't know if you can see so here the global, most of the global cocoa supply chain is dominated by large transnational firms, and you have a small share of farmer cooperatives. And the distribution varies across the world. And you have certain countries that are more dominated by these transnational firms than others. You have in Latin America, Peru, Brazil, for instance, a much important share of smaller companies. Also because the market is smaller, so there is less. It's less attractive for large companies to invest there because the volumes are not that significant. But interestingly enough, most of countries have a high market concentration, as I was telling you. So less than 4 companies concentrate more than 50% of the market share, and that can compromise competitiveness, right? But in the end, these largest companies are also those setting up most of the commitments. And what do they commit on varies a lot, but specifically the most very, very sensitive topics that are put a lot in the media, like deforestation and child labor. If a company is doing a commitment, usually it's in these activities. But only 7 companies trade most of the cocoa volumes in the world and are doing most of the commitments. But the representation of the small companies is around 30%, almost as big as the large transnational corporations, and they have almost no commitment. This has many explanations that I talk in the paper that is about to come. But in summary, what we need to do is not that the reasoning here is not, okay, there are too many, too small, let's get rid of them because they're not having sustainability commitments. No, we need a level playing field to be able to put them in, to make them join the wave of sustainability, because implementing sustainability activities are smaller. And like I said before, most companies prefer certifications. And as you see here, especially the farmer cooperatives, also because it's easier, right? They have higher direct access to the farms. So it's easier for them to set up the practices as they want, while large companies strongly prefer open, voluntary and public sustainability commitments that attract a lot of attention and also gives them advantage capacity to attract more investment because it is growing. Even though it's smaller, the sustainability demand of cocoa, it is growing. So there is also sort of competition between them to try to attract all these investments. And yeah, I think that's the main thing that I would like to share. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Claudia, for sharing all your insights and giving us some more details into different, also types of companies, and also how the industry is organized. I think that is also already interesting because, as you said, Olam is is acting very much in the background. So it's interesting to see how this actually works, sort of behind the scenes. So you talked about these voluntary certificates and and how effective they are, and also that companies collaborate on them. Is there any, in palm oil, you have the roundtable on sustainable palm oil. Is there any ideas about having or establishing an industry-wide standard to sort of also, as you said, have a more standardized list? Oh, like standard, how you say, like a more standardized way of determining the sustainability of their product, or is it now something that just every company does for themselves?
So there is the Cocoa Forest Initiative that I would say is the biggest umbrella trying to set the standard of where companies should be going in terms of sustainability. And of course, not every company is a signatory. Most of the companies that are signatories are the biggest ones. Again, very few small ones are joining there. But what is very interesting is right now with the upcoming European legislation on due diligence, this is trying to set a little bit more the standard floor of what should be going by law enforcement, right? Which we believe is very important, because then it sets a level playing field for all companies, not only us, but also others. So then whether you like it or not, whether you benefit or doing these sustainability initiatives or not, you have to comply. So I'll say this is a very important action upcoming.
Okay, so there's some development to be seen there. Very good. And also I thought it was quite interesting that you also, what is sustainable in the end, also the difference between the farm level and landscape level, that what sustainable farming could be, that the benefits are not maybe direct.
Maybe in linkage with what Žiga was saying, we also think about climate change vulnerability in our supply chain, which is very important. And in the end, about the impact of climate change, it's determined by your response capacity. And that very often it's determined by your investment capacity. So the industry is moving strongly towards plantations, where you are putting irrigation and more control sensors to monitor in real time every single factor affecting the physiology of the plant. All companies are investing on that. So a very important thing to say regarding that is that probably this kind of initiatives and these kind of companies will survive barely touch, right? But smallholder farmer systems might have to deal with the biggest share of negative impacts.
Yes, then also the question to the two of you, what is then the role of these commodity traders? And also Žiga talked about this gap that you have between the investment and the actual reaping the benefits of this investment in a couple of years. So what could be then the role of also these commodity traders in helping farmers, or maybe closing this gap, or maybe collaborating with Fairtrade? Is there any role for these bigger companies in this?
So first of all, for example, what we did, this is like just this anticipation of impact. So where can we expect them and how could they look like? That's something farmers cannot do. That's something even producer organizations cannot do. So maybe large traders can do that. I don't know, but they. So I would first say collaboration with researchers on that, and it has to be very interdisciplinary. So, for example, in our case, like I mentioned, we couldn't look at any local context. We spent a lot of time on looking at how this could then impact cocoa, banana, tea, coffee, and so on. And we also looked at other crops, by the way, which I didn't show. But yeah, so this is the first thing. So. Of course, the farmers, I think the traders need to somehow get information, probably from us or their own teams, on what the impacts would look like and where these impacts would be, and then identify what the suitable adaptation measures would be. And this needs to be done together with the farmers, because as Claudia has shown her research in Ghana, and there were cases where some farmers did adapt or implement agroforestry and some didn't. So it doesn't mean that we researchers tell them what to use to adapt, so which adaptation measure, but that can also be learned from the field. And then again, it's back to the traders to fund all this, I guess, or any supply chain organization. So it's very, I don't think there's one person or one actor responsible for this, but we can see that all this anticipation, planning, and so on, this is something that producers cannot do themselves, obviously. And they also, they're busy with producing crops, right?
Yeah, I would say for us, like we are having daily contact with the farmers, right? We provide trading to them. We collect a massive amount of data, really a lot. We have a smallholder database, like in absolutely every angle that you can imagine. So we do have very detailed profiles of the farmers we're dealing with. What we are doing is trying to implement all these sustainability initiatives that then we are very busy trying to show impact of these initiatives, so that then we can attract more investment also of other industry partners, so we invest in other farmer groups, right? And it's not always easy, because yes, we capitalize a lot on science. We have a lot of partnership with universities, trying to capitalize also in technologies and different methods for modeling in the future and stuff. Very interesting. And I think that's one of the things that I like from my job, that I can still keep on doing what I used to do before. But it is very difficult in the field because, for instance, let's talk about one of the things that one of the agricultural practices that really helps to boost yields and reduce poverty is pruning, simple pruning of the trees. It's something that we often find the farmers very reluctant to do, because it's cutting some parts of your tree and they feel that you are actually cutting the branch that could deliver next year 2 or 3 cocoa pods, right? But actually trying to explain the science in between and set up trials to show them, okay, look, we did it, but actually this farmer didn't lose, instead it gained, or other practices like agroforestry. And this is very important because sometimes you see the impacts of agroforestry systems it's not an immediate effect. You have to wait. And honestly, farmers don't have this resilience capacity economically to invest on this. One of the reasons why they have poorly managed system is because they are in the poverty trap, right? They don't have the resources to implement good agricultural practices, good fertilizer, and then they have lower yields, and then they cannot fund themselves and so on. So it's very difficult. We have to do very strong and close work to try to convince them to put more shade trees in the farm, so you are going to be more resilient to climate shocks and so on. So yes, we need more collaboration, and I think we're doing more. And what I find more fascinating from my role is that I want to boost that and even bring the link closer with researchers.
Yeah, cool. Very nice. Interesting. Yeah, you also talked about this gap still, right? So it's also a financing issue then, I guess, or yeah, to make sure that this investment can be done at all at the right now. Then, yeah, another sort of player in this question, I think, then is the consumer. You also referred to it's demand-driven, or the sustainability efforts. To which degree do then the consumers and the markets? Yeah, I mean, of course, Olam answers or sort of reacts to that as well. But yeah, what do you see as the stake of the consumer in this, Claudia?
Well, that's a very important driver. Like I tell you, if there is no demand of this, then Nestlé, the Hershey's of the world, won't invest in more sustainable cocoa, because where they are going to sell, it is really a very high cost implementing all these activities. Just to give you an example, you want to do your sustainability program there. You have to train your farmers. You have to set up the data collection system. You have to have agricultural officials or officers to go and train the farmers. And you have to have a whole logistic change to deliver the products. For instance, more organic fertilizer, you need time, you need sustainability things. It's a massive thing. And then you want to do traceability, then you have to have the logistic change to do the separation and so on. It's really massive. So that's what I say. It's not that, you know, like companies like, if you don't give me the money, I don't do it. No, really, there are costs. It's very important to take that into account. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question. You asked me something else. Else. I'm forgetting.
No, yeah, like the consumer. I mean,
yeah.
How that's, yeah.
Okay, so something very important there is like the markets are growing a lot in emerging economies, Asia, China, India. It's growing the consumption of cocoa at least. So this is just going to increase. And what happens usually is the demands for sustainable products is a niche market, mainly in Europe and USA, high income countries. So they are driving this, but it is not enough, right? Like, especially if you take into account the increase in demand in emerging economies. So that's why we need legislation to put the level playing field. It doesn't matter if your consumers are demanding for that or not, you have to comply.
Yeah. So yeah, we have all these. It's quite complex, as you said, right? It's and quite some investment also asked for. Is there any more questions from the audience? Then I can't see any at the moment, but if you have any question, please feel free to ask them, or maybe also the speakers, if you want to ask each other questions. That's also fine. Or have something more to discuss. But okay, there's no questions in the chat right now. Okay, so then I'm just checking out some more notes on this. Okay, so then we sort of have the call for the legislation that needs to come, and you already mentioned that on EU level there's some legislation to be expected and coming up soon. So yeah, we'll see if that would, yeah, help or work. If there's no more questions, I think, seeing also that we are about to finish this session here, to close it off as well. So yeah, I would then very much like to thank you, Žiga and Claudia, for presenting your work, for giving us the insights into what you've been researching. I think also especially the insight into this, the trading business and in the industry, I found quite interesting to get a bit of a glimpse behind the scene. So thank you very much for your time and for your participation. We will, we recorded this meeting, so we will make a recording for that available online on our YouTube channel of the Amsterdam Sustainability Institute. So you can rewatch this session as well. And also if you have any more questions or want to get in touch with us about something else, just do so, please. And yes, thank you all for coming, attending, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.